right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am so sorry we had some technical difficulties, but we are here. So today I am here with Kathy Cheng, and we are going to be talking about the Supreme Court and the last elections. I hope you guys can hear me. So anyway, the Supreme Court of Texas is the court of the last resort for civil appeals in the U.S. in the United States, in the state of Texas. There is a different court, however, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and is court of last resort in criminal cases. Today, we will be talking, like I said, with Kathy. She is the 2020 Democratic nominee for Texas Supreme Court Judge. Kathy, welcome to Echo FM.
Thank you, Monica. Great to be with you all today.
All right. Before we go on, Kathy, I have to tell you, last night I was talking to my son about the questions, and I kept saying court, and he kept trying to teach me that it's court. So just in case I say court, you know what I mean. I mean C-O-U-R-T. Okay.
All right.
Okay. All right. So do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As you've stated, I was the former statewide candidate Democratic nominee for the Texas Supreme Court Place 6. That was a statewide position that I was running. It's also the same position I ran in 2018. Now that election is over, on my normal weekdays, I'm actually a practicing attorney that does commercial litigation, family law, probate, estate, real estate, tax, and that's what I normally do. And besides being a full-time attorney, I'm also a full-time mom, and so that's what I enjoy the most, being a full-time mom.
Awesome. So we are so honored to have you, and as a community of, like African community, minorities or whatever, let's just say generally everybody, we have a few questions. And so you are the best person to actually answer these questions for us. So some of the questions that I received, from some people, and I'm going to read it. Each year in January, the Chief Justice of Texas Supreme Court delivers the State of Court address. If you were in the position of Chief Justice, what would be your top couple of points in your annual address in January 2021?
Well, I'm grateful for that question, because if I were the chief making that address, annual address, I would actually be telling everyone that for first time in Texas history, we have a very diverse Texas Supreme Court makeup, because for a quarter of a century, the Texas Supreme Court has been made up of all Republicans. It's 9 seats, and although it's non-partial, with the Supreme Court being 9 Republicans, we have a lack of diversity. So if I were the one making the address, that would mean that the Democrats would have won the 4 seats for this 2020 election, and we would have had the first time have some sort of balance. And that's the segue in assuming that had occurred. One of the things I wanted to address was the redistricting issue, because in 2021, actually, those lines have already been in the works of being in a drawing right after the election. That would be probably one of the biggest things that would go before the Supreme Court when that comes up with the legal issues. So that would have been something that I wanted to assure all the constituents across the state of Texas, to reassure them that there would be a very diverse viewpoints on how we view the legal aspects of that redistricting. And unfortunately, since I wouldn't be the one making that address, or any of the Democratic candidates making that address, we have a serious issue on the Supreme Court. When that legal issue comes up before the court, we still have the 9 panel of Republicans looking at it. And that would stay with us for the next 10 years, because redistricting occurs every 10 years. In 2021, when that comes up, it will stay with Texans for 10 years. So for those of those constituents like myself and you who see the monstrous lines that's occurring across the state of Texas, that will probably get even worse after the redrawing on the redistricting.
Yeah. Okay. And you just talked about diversity. What do you attribute that diversity to? Do you think, is more of the millennials that don't necessarily care about races? Do you attribute that to the millennials probably, or maybe is it that as we go on, more and more people are starting to look beyond race?
Well, one of the things about the diversity, I want to just clarify to the listeners, when I say diversification, it's not just the ethnic groups.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
It's a diversity of viewpoints, right? Because if we look at the makeup of the general population, we have a very diverse group, and everybody has their own viewpoints, and that's the diversity I'm talking about. Having that different viewpoints, perspective on looking at the issues before us, the legal aspects of it. While the ethnic groups attribute to that, because let's be realistic, each ethnic group has their way of viewing things, but it doesn't necessarily attribute, if the same mindset, you're not going to attribute to that diversity. So it's the viewpoints that I'm referring to. And whether it's the millennials not paying attention to it, I think this past election, 2020 election, more people were paying attention to the judicial race, but still a very small amount, because the general population don't understand just how important and critical the courts are compared to the other branches. And that has to do with the lack of education. While the statewide candidates did do a lot to campaign, COVID played a huge factor in restricting that education process. Because while Zoom is a good way of reaching to a lot of folks, the reality is broadband is not widely available to rural counties, or the smartphones is not readily available to the rural county folks, or desktops or laptops and things like that. So that is a problem, how we still have a big gap in educating the general population about the importance of the judicial courts. So that's what attributed to, a big factor attributed to the loss in 2020.
Okay, and you just talked about redistricting. So there will be some cases that will get to the Supreme Court for minorities. So what advice do you have for minorities, or what do you say if those cases get to the Supreme Court for minorities to get fair hearing?
Well, I always tell everyone, regardless of which ethnic group, and especially minorities, the fact that you're a minority, you need to be paying attention to each case and each race, right? Because as I travel and campaign across the state of Texas, a lot of minority members say, well, I don't want to vote. One vote's not going to make a difference. I'm a minority. Well, it's because you're a minority, you need to pay more attention. Because if you don't, the idea of being a minority will consistently be the fact, right? So that's what we need to pay attention and let people know. Stop thinking in the normal way, but thinking in a different way. And that's where the different perspective comes in, right? I look at myself as a minority, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a good thing, and saying, hey, I stand out. So when I speak up, I'm going to be looked at, right? And that's what every minority should look at. Say, don't look at it as discount your vote as one little vote or one little voice and you're in the minority. Think of it as, because you're a minority and you're different, when you speak up, when you get involved in politics, when you vote, people start paying attention. AAPI is a very classic example, right? The Asian American population had a very low turnout in the prior years, but in 2020, a lot of these candidates placed funds for the AAPI outreach. Why? Because AAPI started to vote. And that's the message I want to send out to all the minorities out there. Just because we're minorities at one point or another, at some point when we all come together collectively as various minority groups, we become the voice majority.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think to some extent, maybe because minority, foreigners, they're used to probably not being heard, and that probably even became a second nature. Do you think that maybe as minorities we're probably more intimidated and we don't see the need to probably make a difference because we're not going to be heard anyway, because it's been that way for so long?
Well, I think for the immigrants and minority that have immigrated from a country that is more suppressive with respect to speaking out for those individuals, it's hard to get that mentally adjusted to the U.S. Okay, and like for example, in my native country, if you get involved in politics because of political instabilities, if you get involved in politics, it could sometimes lead to life-threatening issues in the past. You know, and when people come from a country like that and you come into the United States, it's hard to see, well, there's a different type of politics in the US. So they tend to say, well, let me distance myself from politics. But if you think about it, if you left your former country to come to the United States for that freedom, the enjoyment of the ability to speak out and liberty, well, how is it different if you don't speak out now? You're no different than being in your native country. So I tell people, stop thinking of you're in your native country. You are in the United States. And if there's any place that you could be outspoken and without any issues or fear of endangering your life or your family, this is the country. I mean, look at me. I'm an Asian American, first to ever run for a statewide race.
Right.
So that just tells you, well, yes, there are certain differences. There's still some discrepancies in what we have in the US. It's not a perfect system, but the reality is we have the law that says all of us are equal. If you're a US citizen, you're all equal, regardless of which ethnic group, regardless of your skin color, regardless whether you're in the majority or minority. And then when you're, especially when you're in a minority, you need to collectively act together with the rest of the groups. Because if you don't, you're constantly in your little pool of community members that can't make a difference.
Right.
That's the reality of it. With whether it's the AAPI, whether it's the Nigerian group, whether it's the African American or the Latino group.
So, Kathy, the Texas Democratic Party has created a committee to do a review of its performance in the 2020 elections. With your experience running 2 statewide races, should you be on that committee, and what would your advice be to the committee?
I think it's always beneficial to have candidates who ran in the prior elections and be part of that committee to give input, not necessarily just statewide, but candidates running from congressional seats or even local seats, because those all work differently. Those campaigns work differently. So you definitely need to have those type of diverse candidates on the committee to give their perspectives as to what they felt was missing and what they see was required to go forward from and learn from this lesson. At the same time, the makeup, aside from the candidates that the TDP picks, it's extremely important, because if you're picking the same committee members that caused the problem or have the lack of action, you're just repeating the whole process, right? I mean, let's be realistic. The Texas Democratic Party has not won a statewide race in about 25 years. And there's a reason for that, because we're using the same old method over and over. And that old saying, don't fix it if it ain't broke. Well, it is broke. It needs fixing.
So is this a committee that was formed because of the last election? So they're supposed to do a deep dive and see what happened for 2012? Is that different?
The committee, from my understanding, is that it is to assess exactly what went wrong. Because in 2018, the excuse of the loss was we didn't have enough funds. There were not enough funding coming into Texas to help with the GOTV. Well, in 2020, funds were there, more than what they had originally estimated for the 2020 election. Yet, when you look at the 2020 election, the outcome, in my perspective and a lot of individuals' perspective, it was worse than 2018. And so there had to be a reason for that. It's not about funding. It's not about the lack of funds. It's something else. So when you look at a situation like that and you compare the numbers from a midterm election in 2018 versus a presidential, the numbers, the outcome, you have to reassess. Is it the leader or the staff of the TDP? And that's, I hope, from this committee, a real deep analysis of what went wrong and what should be done to go forward would be the outcome of it so that we can move forward into 2022 into a better outcome.
Okay. All right. So that's good. Let's talk about the last elections. What are your perspective on the Texas election results as far as voter suppression and limiting voting rights? For example, in some states, I don't know all the states, but if someone has been convicted of a felon, they can't, if they have a felony conviction, they cannot vote. Is that voter suppression?
Well, I can't speak as to outside the state of Texas, but I know in the state of Texas, one of the false messages that's been out there and surfacing around to the general voters is that if you have a conviction, you cannot vote, okay? And that is false. If you serve, the easiest way what we say is you've done the crime and you served the time.
Right.
You are entitled to register and vote. Yet, depending on which county you're in, sometimes when they go turn in their voter registration, they're told you cannot because you have been, you had a conviction previously. And that is false. And that's one of the things that we need to continue to educate our voters, that once they have finished their time, so let's say even in a deferred adjudication process, where kind of like a parole situation in a layman's term, if they've done all that, served their time, they can go ahead and vote. But that's not something that we as a general community educate people a lot, because we just assume people know that.
Okay. All right. So in that case, then, what is the role of the Texas Supreme Court when there is a contested presidential election?
With respect to the Texas Supreme Court, well, the Texas Supreme Court only deals with the state of Texas. When you're talking about the presidential, contested presidential election overall, it would go up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
Okay? Now, with respect to the Texas Supreme Court, what they got involved in with this past election had to do with the COVID expansion, under the COVID voting, under the COVID expansion. Other issues with the voter suppression issues, but ultimately those will go up to the Supreme Court, because that has to do with overall, you start off with the state court, or you could go directly to the federal when it comes to voter. But usually those actually, for the presidential, it'll go up to the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay, so I asked that because so we do have a president and we have a president-elect and that we know claims to be the 270 required electoral votes, but the president has yet to concede. Is there, what is the role in that case? Because now we've had the Attorney General who's filed for other 4 states to revert their results, and then he was joined by 17 other attorney generals. I know it went to the Supreme Court and it was thrown out, but given that the president has gone to various states, has already filed suit, dozens and dozens, and he's been told, or it has been, dismissed, denied, or, he has withdrawn. So when it comes to the Texas Supreme Court in that case, what is the role of Texas Supreme Court in that case?
Let me just clarify something. Anyone can file a lawsuit, all right? And whether it's the presidential or any civil suit, anyone can bring a lawsuit if they want to. The question, the deeper question is it even a viable lawsuit, right? And that's what you see right now with the presidential. It's not just because he's filing these lawsuits, and whether it's the attorney general's filing these lawsuits for these elections, ultimately what it boils down to, is it even a viable lawsuit? When these cases are thrown out or not heard, okay, the U.S. Supreme Court and the Texas Supreme Court has the right to say, we're not going to hear it, right? Even though earlier you said Texas Supreme Court is the court of last resort, Texas Supreme Court can look at a case that comes before and says, we're not going to hear it. That's the same thing.
Even before listening to it.
Right. They could look at the stuff and say, well, this is something we're not going to address, right?
Okay.
Same thing with the US Supreme Court. So
Mhm.
when these cases are thrown out,
Mhm.
they look at it and go, well, do we consider it or do we not consider it?
Mhm.
So that's what we're looking at. So just because all these cases are being brought in, the lawsuits with
Right.
respect to the election,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that the individual who brought the lawsuit would have a viable claim with respect to what they're
Mhm.
saying. No
Right.
different than some folks would come up to me and say, Kathy, I don't get it. I wasn't in a fault in this civil lawsuit. Why am I
Mhm.
being sued? And so you do understand that it's not about whether someone's right or wrong when they bring lawsuits. Anybody could
Mhm.
bring a lawsuit for any reason.
Mhm.
Ultimately, what it boils down to is it a viable claim?
Right.
And
Okay. So, Kathy, I do understand the due process and the right, to have all votes counted, and his right as well, to file lawsuit, just like you said, and then it's up to the Supreme Court to, see if it's viable. But the longer we drag this out, there's some, leaders or, U.S. officials that have gotten death threats, and so the longer we continue with this, I usually say that the leaders' voices and what they say carries a lot of weight. And so the longer we continue with this, there are some supporters that are getting angry and they do believe, really, truly believe that election was, fair, not fair and square. So when does it end and who is in charge to actually, bring it to an end?
well, the easiest way will be the individual that's in office to end this. The reality is, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, with that particular individual in there who's not really a true leader, he's going to drag this out, and
Mhm.
which is going to cost the American taxpayers money on these frivolous lawsuits. Uh, Whether the supporters would be angered by this, the longer we drag, yes, I do agree with you. The longer this process drags out, the longer the voters will be angry, the supporters. But at the same time, I think when we look at this, this is a defining moment for our country. This could define what's to happen for our president-elect leader, how he acts, how he carries forward under the circumstances. Because this is, I think, in history, first time in history that we've ever had an election where an elected leader refuses to concede the loss. The numbers
Mhm.
definitely are there. The electoral votes are there. The countless number of frivolous lawsuits have been thrown out and yet continues to go forward. This is how we define what will likely happen for our newly elect presidential candidate, how he would transition this process. I think ultimately um, he he will be in the office. The one that's in the current office will have to step down, whether he likes it or not. That's just the reality of it. But
Mhm.
this is a defining moment to determine how we as a nation will come back under the newly elected leader. And I think it's going to be a good thing for this country
Mhm.
for us to see something that we've never encountered. How we can
So,
we could actually be we could look at this as a bad thing with the lawsuits, or we could say we'll overcome this, and I believe we will.
mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. America has always been resilient. But for some of us, for us that are not, legal, like you are, we may ask a question that if God forbid something happens, because these are dangerous behaviors. So if something happened, were to happen to, one of those people that have gotten threats, who would be held accountable by the law?
Well, it all depends on who actually was the cause of that. Okay.
Mhm.
And I think what we as a nation should think of it is, instead of worrying about the ifs, what ifs, okay,
Mhm.
we need to trust in the judicial system. If something were like something criminal were to happen under the circumstances, we need to trust the legal system that justice will prevail at the end of the day. And rather than worrying about the what ifs, this is something that will take part regardless of the fact that we worry about it. We need to look forward to saying, what do we need to do as a nation to heal first, as opposed to worry about the what ifs that's being caused by the current leader in the White House? Because there's too many factors of what ifs. If we focus too much on the negativity, we will never get past this and heal as a nation. We will never heal as a state or a nation. And this is what we need to do. As a nation, we need to heal. As a state, we need to heal to get back to where we were before all this chaos.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, right.
Okay. So in January 20th or January 20th, Joe Biden is supposed to be inaugurated. And Trump, if Trump does not move out of the White House, are we staring at a constitutional crisis if the current occupant of the White House does not vacate? Or does he even get an eviction letter? What happens? Walk us through the process.
The US Constitution has rules in effect. I know a lot of citizens are worried about that. It's not if he will be inaugurated. President-elect Biden will be inaugurated, and the current elected official in the White House will have to step down. There's no doubt about it. There is no, I think not just the nation, but the entire world is watching us. The world will not, our allies will not be standing by him to watch our nation go through what people are fearing right now. So that's why I don't look at it as a fearful factor. I believe we will proceed with that inauguration without any issues. Right now, he's just being bullying right now, giving a fear to, exposing that fear potentially to all the voters. But as you can see, as the time goes on, that delaying process that he's doing, the dragging on, it's angering even his own supporters. If you look at the current recent resignations, no elected officials in the US history have seen such turnover rate. He has more high turnover rates than any restaurant folks that I know of, in any establishment. So we will have the inauguration. We need to stop as a nation to think, what if it's not gonna happen? It will happen.
Right, okay. All right, so you are talking about, yes, that, we're going to have inauguration and it is going to happen. Yes, we don't want the world to look at America and, we don't want America to be a laughing stock. But so I want to go to something else. No, actually, I was going to ask you, 106 House representatives were in support of these lawsuits. What do you make of that? Looking from outside, the rest of us are thinking these are educated people. These are people that should know better. I mean, regardless of, party affiliation, but still, that these are those educated people that we probably even look up to, as leaders. So what do you make of that?
Well, unfortunately, the only thing I could think of is for these individuals, the fact that they are so affiliated with their party leaders, maybe they're actually intimidated because they have been so intertwined with that elected official in the White House right now that they fear what's to come. So the only thing is they're trying to do is to show support. And this is just my personal opinion. Because he has such, or alleged financial pull out there and the alleged connections, I think these elected officials are fearing and aligning with him as a result of that, which is a very misguided issue, because when we see the inauguration take place in January, we will see some of these folks change their tunes. And we've already seen that. Like I said earlier, we've already seen a lot of his past supporters change their tunes of now becoming non-supporters. It's just that these 100-something elected officials are too stubborn to admit they were wrong, to align themselves with this particular elected official. And they don't know how to get out of it. Potentially that they themselves have been threatened by him. So it's regardless of the education that one has, I think it's just more of a fear factor. If one is strong enough to say, hey, I made a mistake, it's okay. I now see his ways is the wrong way. I'm going to do my job as an elected official for the best interest of the people, I'm not going to align myself regardless of party affiliation. That is what defines an elected official. So for those individuals in those 100 plus elected officials area, this is the time to say, you know what, your time is up. Next time I'm voting you out. When someone is doing this, the elected official who should be acting as a leader and is acting like a bully, and you still align yourself with him, your time is up. And this is what the good process of a democracy is about. I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to vote you out. And this is where that voice comes in. All the minority votes makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I see David Dambre here. You say 126 Republicans supported such. Yes, I know, like Kathy mentioned, it's over 100 of them, 100 plus that supported it. So anyway, let's go to something else, Kathy. And so this summer, we saw the eruption of protest and unrest due to the killing of Black and Brown by police. How should the Supreme Court address racial injustice and police brutality in Texas?
Well, I've always said this, and I'll continue to say this. As individuals, we all have our own little bias. And we need to understand and recognize such bias. And I believe de-biasing ourselves through educating, acknowledgement and then education process will help us understand how do we counter these biases. When these cases come before a court, a jury, or a judge, we take into that courtroom with our own experiences. The problem is, if you yourself never experienced this, you could sit there all day, Monica, and tell me about brown lives and Black lives matter because of all these killings and stuff. But if I myself have never been so intertwined with that community to see and understand, these are just words. And that's what we're having a problem with the judicials. When people say we need reform and stuff, you have elected officials it's such a different group. They can't understand that. You know, when people say brown lives matter and a lot of people got angry and Black lives matter, they got angry and said, well, all lives matter. Yes, the reality is all lives matter. But what the message, what they're saying is, because of the intrinsic bias brown lives and Black lives encounter and the racial injustice that occurs, they're saying, hey, we need help. We need more help than normal. That doesn't equate to saying they're saying that the whites don't matter or the Asians don't matter. And that's the problem with our elected officials, whether it's the judiciary or any of the branches. But especially in the court system, because we're supposed to be neutral, we need to have more de-bias training and more of outreach, community outreach, to just understand and listen to the communities. What is it that they're concerned about? What is it that what they're really saying when they're saying there's racial injustice, there's racial inequality, even in the court, in the civil courtrooms, right? A lot of people equate that only in the criminal courtroom, but in reality, it occurs in civil courts. Texas Supreme Court is a civil side, right? The Court of Criminal Appeals is the criminal side. Even though one's civil, one's criminal, racial biasness occurs whether it's in the civil system or the criminal system. If you don't believe me, hey, as a lawyer, there's certain counties that I walk into and I get singled out and say, you must be Attorney Kathy Cheng. And I'm looking around the courtroom saying there are lots of attorneys here, but because I'm the only Asian who walks into that courtroom, I get called out. Imagine yourself as a defendant in a criminal system or in a civil system. Just imagine how you're treated, right? And we need to understand as a society, and that's why I totally believe in de-bias training on a regular basis, because we're human beings. We are subjected to so many different factors that we need to have that de-bias training on a regular basis, because our society has conditioned us to be biased to some extent based on societal norms.
So talking about race, I think there are a lot of people that have doubts because since March, we've had lockdowns due to the corona pandemic.
Mhm.
To bring this to an end, we may need a vaccine. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation about the vaccine. And do states have the power to force people to get vaccinated?
With the state vaccination, I am not sure with respect to which part, if there was a law for that yet. Not to the best of my knowledge that there's a law in place that allows, statutorily, that allows the state to force the vaccine. But I do believe with respect to making a recommendation, the state elected officials definitely has that with the health department, with even the highest level of the governor has the power and authority, and then the county judges would have an authority to make a suggestion of for the welfare of the citizens to be vaccinated, especially when we're looking at the continual high rise of COVID situations. But as far as forcing individuals, I have yet to seen something in the laws to allow that. And like I said, I haven't really dug into a major research on that, but as of present time, I have not seen it.
So the same thing goes then, can, you know, like a state, maybe like a statewide mandate, you have to wear a mask?
The mask is, you have to understand there's two different things.
So is that
when you're talking about vaccination, when you're talking about vaccination is injection, right? Penetrating the skin. When you're looking at mask, it's not harm. There's no device going into one's body. It is only a device that goes on an individual body. So if one were to differentiate the two, so the mandatory mask, to me, I feel that is a very legitimate request, right? When we're looking at our nation versus other countries that's containing the whole COVID-19 situation. Why? It's because individuals in those countries are abiding by the mandatory mask wearing. And what's interesting is, and I talked to citizens from other countries versus our own Americans on why the difference in the outlook from the citizens. And the reality is, as US citizens, we are so free to enjoy the freedom. We have so much freedom in the United States that to say to wear a mask, a mandatory mask wearing, is an infringement on one's right. It's not. It's a way of expressing a respect for our fellow Americans by saying, I'm not worried about getting it from you. I'm more worried about giving you what I may potentially have. Right? That's the mentality we need to think of as Texans and as Americans. Because a lot of people say, well, I'm not worried about getting COVID from you. It's not about getting it from somebody. It's about preventing the spread in the event that I may have it. See, for me as a statewide candidate back then, I traveled everywhere. So the likelihood of me getting that and not having any symptoms and spreading it was a lot higher. So I constantly wore the mask as a courtesy and as a health concern for my fellow Americans. And we as Americans, if we say we care and respect others and want to make sure we don't continue to spread, wearing that mandatory mask, if it was mandated, I don't think it's a harsh request of all Texans.
And I guess as Danielle once said on this show, that wearing a mask, protecting one another is patriotic.
Right.
So I'm going to go to the last question, Kathy. What is your call to action for African community leaders, business owners, and registered voters for the 2022 midterm elections?
First of all, we need to continue to register voters. We need to encourage newly naturalized citizens in the Black communities. And also, if you move from one county to another, you need to re-register. But when you move from one part of the county to within the same county, you don't need to re-register, just need to change the address. But if you move from one county to another county, re-register your registration, make sure your registration is intact. And also let everybody know, get involved, be activist. Being a voter doesn't necessarily, you have to understand the process. People say, well, I just go out and vote. Well, if they don't even know what they're voting for, it makes no difference. So educating people, if you, for example, Monica, you know about the Texas Supreme Court through interaction with me, talking to others, expressing to them why it's important to vote for every position on the ballot. That's a thing that we need to start now, not just when it comes close to election time. Once you get to 2022, things add up and then you forget. So right now, even though I'm not a candidate for 2022, I'm still working with community leaders and activists to see what we need to do as we gear up to 2022. We as citizens, concerned citizens, and especially as concerned minority citizens and as business owners need to continue this process so that when we get to 2022, we're not scrambling around trying to get everything in place.
Right, right. All right, I do see, I don't see any questions from people, but I do see comments, from Millicent Nyamon, David Dambre, Lucy Tifase, Kathy, unless if you have a last word for us, that's all I had for you. Do you have a last word for us?
Yes, I want to thank all the voters and supporters across the state of Texas for this 2020 election. They put a tremendous effort in getting out the message about the Texas Supreme Court and the other elected offices that were on the ballot. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, from my staff. This is not the last that you've heard of me. I will continue to be in the background to help, whether I run again, I'm not sure, but I've always enjoyed interacting with Monica. Thank you again, once again, for inviting me for this opportunity to speak to everyone. And I look forward to many more years of friendship.
So let me tell you, Kathy, right after, actually, I think it was the day after election, so a friend called me and she said that she saw your name on the ballot. And so she said, she came to your event, right? I said, yeah, she did. And so for her, it was so exciting to see a name of somebody that she has seen. And actually, another person told me that when they saw you at the event, they heard you introduce yourself and they came and talked to you. I didn't even know that until after the elections. And so there's that excitement of, there was that excitement of, I've met her, I have to vote for her. I was excited to see your name, so we wouldn't want you to give up. We would want you to continue the fight. Like you said, minority voters, they make a difference. And if that's the case, then you have to show us the way.
Yes, and I also want to say specifically, minority women's votes, extremely powerful. We as women need to continue to uplift women. And when a female candidate runs, we need to make sure we give every effort to support a female candidate, because when you compare a female candidate versus a male candidate is there with supporters and fundraising money and so forth ready. While a female candidate, and especially a minority female candidate, starts at the back of the race. So what we need to make sure at some point, by uplifting women, by continuing to encourage minority women to be involved in politics, so that at one point, hopefully one day, we'll get to see women and men as candidates at the same level, starting at the same line instead of back of the line.
Okay. All right. Well, that will be all for us. Everybody that tuned in to watch, everybody that's listening to us on the radio, thank you so much for tuning in. And Kathy, thank you so much for your time as well.
Thank you, and happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.